One might be bewildered to discover that some principled defenders of the right to keep and bear arms are supporting a Georgia bill that ostensibly puts state power behind the right to self-defense, but which actually undercuts other fundamental rights. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. Yeah, this is a perplexing, troubling situation for many people who believe in rights. Bearing Arms' Cam Edwards reports on the status of this Georgia legislation. Quote, under HB 1364, introduced by Representative Martin Momtahan, property owners who forbid lawful concealed carry would assume responsibility for the safety of their customers, which means they would be liable for any injuries suffered if they're unable to protect themselves on the premises. Well, such a proposal might appeal to people who recall the horrific 1991 experience of Susanna Hupp, who had a firearm in her car, but because Texas law at the time forbade it, she didn't bring the weapon into the Killeen, Texas restaurant, where a mass shooter soon killed 24 people. Or it might appeal to people who recall the more recent fact that numerous victims of a mass shooter in Lewiston, Maine, were inside a bowling alley that had a sign on the door indicating it was gun-free. As crime researcher John Lott has explained, people with criminally violent intent tend to avoid places where they can reasonably surmise that potential victims might be armed. But those who might support this bill in Georgia or the idea of proposing similar legislation elsewhere, for example, the Wyoming House just passed a wide block of gun-free zones on government property, but it doesn't apply to private choice on private property. Well, supporters in Georgia or potentially in other states might want to reconsider and consider the rights they attack when pushing this kind of bill. Edwards refers to Doug Richardson's TV 11 Atlanta report on the proposal, which features quotes from Representative Momtahan.
All we want to make sure is if you're in the store or you're anywhere and that has a no gun sign, then that store needs to understand that they have absolute custodial care of that person.
In other words, this bill claims for the state the power to tell a property owner and his potential client that they can't engage in freedom of association on their own terms. The terms are being imposed by the government. When someone owns private property and asks another person to enter on certain terms, he has a right to ask, and the potential visitor has a right to decline. Such freedom allows others to see and test those earlier arrangements. By claiming that the property owner would take on the obligation of custodial care when a customer enters his private property, Mr. Momtahan is imposing his own will on the others. It's the politician telling the property owner that he takes on that obligation. In fact, when two parties agree to one gaining admittance into the property of another, the other takes on contractual care, not state-mandated custodial care. And this bill breaches their right to engage in contracts on their own terms. Let me offer an example. For many of our teenage years, my brother and I used to swim in a quarry close to our house, and the owners, who were attorneys, allowed us to go once our family paid $20 and signed a waiver of liability stipulating that if we got hurt there, the owner wouldn't be liable for our actions. This Georgia bill stands in complete contradistinction from that privately reached form of agreement. It implies that private property is somehow public, but public property is and only is that which takes people's tax money to function. All other property, even if the owner opens the door to lots and lots of people, is private and operates based on natural rights. Adds Richards, quote, this bill, HB 1364, says any lawful weapons carrier who is prohibited from carrying and who is injured shall have a cause of action against the person, business, or other entity that owns or legally controls such property. Well, one would have a cause of action if there were a breach of contract, or let's say the property owner forced the person onto his land or into his business or shop or whatever and then disarmed that person. Otherwise, the parties have agreed to the arrangement, and no third party has a right to interfere. But HB 1364 clouds that fundamental principle of freedom, hiding it behind enthusiasm for what some might purport to be a gun rights bill. It's important to avoid getting caught in this kind of legalistic trap, this kind of legislative false choice. Having the state impose artificial political terms on free association is no better than the state threatening to take away people's firearms. And the act of government taking away the right to keep and bear arms must be distinguished from the right of a property owner to ask that others enter that property on his or her own terms, not terms imposed by politicians. Seeing this bill clearly allows a person to see the wider scope of individual liberty. And it's important to avoid being fooled into thinking such superficially attractive proposals aren't actually threats to freedom. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe. Find us on Rumble where they don't censor us, and share the videos far and wide, especially for students whom you think might be interested in these principles of liberty and scholarship. You can also find us on YouTube where, yes, of course, they do censor us. And please double check that you're subscribed there. Find us all the time at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org to find out what the whole team is doing to contribute to the Media Research Center, and check out the MRC TV shop. You can find us inside Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram, and of course on X. And if you want to find me on Gab, I'm at Gardner Goldsmith, and on X, I'm at Gard Goldsmith. Thank you for watching, everyone. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.